My name is Olivia, and the night my life split in two started with a joke that was never meant to be funny to me. The house was full of people, glasses clinking, music humming in the background. I was standing there with a cheap paper crown on my head, pretending I belonged in my own birthday party, when my mom tapped her glass and raised her voice so everyone could hear. She wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulled me closer like she was proud, and said, "She is this family's mistake." Laughter exploded around us. I froze. Then she added, with that smug little smirk she always had when the spotlight was on her, "We used protection 99% of the time. She is the remaining 1%. Everyone laughed louder, as if my entire existence was the punchline they had been waiting for. I watched faces I knew, relatives, neighbors, people who had seen me grow up, tilt back in laughter while I stood there like an exhibit, a freak accident that just happened to breathe. My dad looked away. My brother stared at the floor. No one stepped in. No one said, "That is enough." Something inside me cracked so sharply it felt like the room went silent, even though they were still laughing. A few hours later, when the guests left and the lights dimmed, I packed a backpack, took the $40 I had been saving in a shoebox, and walked out the front door without saying goodbye. I told myself I would rather disappear than stay where I was, just a statistic, a joke, a mistake. If you had heard your own mother say that about you, would you have stayed and taken it? Or walked away like I did and let her live with the silence she created? Because what I did next is the reason she ended up on her knees in front of me 6 years later, begging for something she never thought she would need from the child she once turned into a punchline. The first night away from home, I learned what $40 is really worth. It bought me a one-way bus ticket to a city 3 hours away, and a stale sandwich that tasted like cardboard and freedom at the same time. I dozed upright in the station until a security guard nudged me awake and told me I could not sleep there. My legs were shaking when I stepped back out into the dark, but turning around was never an option. I found a cheap, questionable room above a convenience store that charged by the week. The wallpaper peeled and the mattress sagged, but the landlord took cash and asked no questions. That was enough. The first job I got was washing dishes in a tiny restaurant where the owner yelled more than the customers talked. It did not matter. I scrubbed plates until my fingers ached, pocketed my pay in wrinkled bills, and counted them over and over on the floor of that tiny room. I learned quickly that rent did not care about my feelings, so I picked up an extra shift at a coffee shop down the street. By day, I poured lattes and smiled at strangers. By night, I smelled like soap, grease, and burnt espresso. Somewhere in between, I began sketching again. I had always drawn in secret at home because my mom called it a waste of time, something for a girl with no real future. Now I filled cheap notebooks with faces, hands, little scenes from the restaurant, the coffee shop, the bus rides. Drawing made my chest hurt less. A girl who worked the morning shift at the coffee shop noticed my notebook one slow afternoon. She had messy hair, paint on her nails, and the kind of easy laugh that did not sound cruel. She introduced herself as Sarah and asked to sit with me during our break. That day, she slid a flyer for a local art night across the table and said, "You should show your work. It is better than you think." I saved every tip, every spare dollar, until I could move out of the room above the store and into a tiny apartment I shared with her. We lived on instant noodles and shared rent, and for the first time in my life, when someone said my name, it was not followed by a joke. Still, on quiet nights, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing my mom's voice in my head like a scratched recording. I kept my number the same but blocked every call from home, letting unknown numbers ring out. I convinced myself I had finally outrun my past, that I had built a life where her words could not reach me anymore. I had no idea then that the same past I was running from was already looking for me, and that the first crack in my new life would appear in the place I felt safest. Behind the counter of a coffee shop, with a name tag on my chest and my guard lowered. 6 years after I walked out of that house with a backpack and $40, I was 23, tired in the way only double shifts can make you, and almost happy. The morning rush at the coffee shop had slowed. I was wiping down a table, my apron dotted with coffee stains, when I heard a voice behind me say my childhood nickname. My spine went rigid. No one here called me that. Slowly, I turned. She was standing in the doorway, clutching her purse like it was the only anchor she had left. Her hair had more gray in it, her shoulders were not as straight, and the confidence she wore like perfume at every party was gone. My mom. For a second, the room tilted. I smelled my old living room, heard the echo of clinking glasses, felt paper crown edges cutting into my scalp. My throat closed up, but my body moved on its own. I straightened, wiped my hands on my apron, and put the counter between us like a shield. "You cannot be here," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is where I work." She opened her mouth, eyes shining with tears, and said my name again, quieter this time. She started talking fast, words tripping over each other, something about needing to see me, needing to explain. Customers glanced over, sensing a scene. I felt heat crawl up my neck. The humiliation from 6 years ago flashed like a neon sign behind my eyes. I held up a hand. "You need to leave," I said. "If you care at all about my job, you will walk out that door." For the first time in my life, she listened to me. She backed away, whispering that she would find another way to talk to me, that she was not giving up. Then she stepped outside, and the bell above the door chimed like a period on a sentence I had been rewriting for years. My hands trembled so hard I had to grip the counter. When my break finally came, I stumbled into the alley behind the shop, sliding down the wall until I was sitting on the cold concrete. Sarah found me there, eyes red, breath shallow. She sat beside me without saying anything at first. After a while, she asked what had happened, and the truth came out in broken pieces. The party, the joke, the $40, the years of silence. She listened without interrupting, without laughing, without calling me a mistake. When I finished, she asked if I wanted to talk to my mom. The answer spilled out of me before I could think. I do not owe her anything. The words felt both powerful and terrifying. I had carved out a life where I was no longer the punchline, but seeing her face again had torn open wounds I thought were scars. I told myself I was fine as long as she kept her distance. What I did not realize was that the universe was not done forcing us into the same frame, and that the next person to pull me back toward my family would be someone I never expected, the brother who stayed behind when I ran. The message came 3 days later on an email account I barely checked anymore. The subject line was just my name. For a moment I thought it was spam, but the first line made my chest tighten. "Liv, it is your brother." I read the entire email standing at the kitchen counter, still in my work shirt, the smell of coffee clinging to my hair. He wrote about the night I left, how the house had felt silent in a way it never recovered from, how my room stayed untouched for months. He wrote about the way our mom stopped hosting big parties as often, how some of her friends began to drift away, how our dad had argued with her behind closed doors. He ended by asking me, almost begging, to meet him. "Please. I know you do not owe any of us anything, but I owe you more than one conversation." The next evening, I sat in the corner of a small diner, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea I was not drinking. When he walked in, he looked older than his age, tired around the eyes in a way that did not come from lack of sleep alone. We stared at each other for a second before he moved forward and hugged me like he was afraid I would disappear if he let go. When we finally sat down, he started talking, words tumbling out like he had been rehearsing them for years. He told me Mom had been trying to find me for a long time. She had reached out to old classmates, asked around town, and spent hours scrolling through social media looking for my face. He had stumbled across a tagged photo of me at a local art event someone posted online. That was how she knew what city I lived in. She found the coffee shop's page, he said. She saw a picture of you behind the counter. That is how she knew where to go. I felt a chill run through me. The idea of her staring at my face on a screen felt invasive, even after 6 years. Then he told me something I did not expect. She has been in therapy, Liv, for a while now. Dad made it a condition if they were going to stay together. The stubborn, defensive part of me wanted to laugh. Therapy did not erase what she had said. It did not wipe away years of sharp comments and public humiliation. But another part of me, the part that still woke up some nights wondering what would have happened if someone had defended me, listened. He went on. She lost a lot, you know. Some of her friends stopped inviting her places after that night. Word got around. People thought she went too far. It is like the spotlight she wanted so badly just burned her instead. I pictured my mom, standing alone in the kitchen where she used to perform for an audience, calling me dramatic while she coded every insult in laughter. I imagined her without the applause. He told me she wanted to meet in a quiet place, somewhere neutral. A park near the old bookstore she used to take us to when we were kids. She wants to apologize, he said, but not the way she tried to ambush you at work. She knows that was wrong. She asked me to ask you. I stared at the table, tracing a pattern in the condensation of my glass. The girl who left with $40 wanted to scream that it was too late. The woman I was now understood that closure is not something you can buy with tips and rent receipts. If I say yes, I finally whispered, I go on my terms. Public place. You stay the whole time. And if she starts minimizing or joking, I leave. He nodded so quickly it almost looked like relief. 2 days later, we sat on a park bench under a tree that had seen better seasons. My mom walked toward us, shoulders rounded, eyes swollen like she had not slept in days. She sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving space between us that felt as wide as the years we had lost. She did not start with excuses. She started with the sentence I had replayed in my head 1,000 times. What I said that night was cruel, she whispered. I used you as a joke to get a laugh, to feel important. I have never forgiven myself for it, even if I acted like I had. For once, she listed the ways she had hurt me without laughing them off. The comments about my weight, my grades, my clothes, the way she compared me to other people's children. She said the words, I was wrong, more than once. It did not erase anything, but it landed differently than the shallow apologies she had thrown around in the past like confetti. I listened, arms folded, feeling every muscle in my body braced. When she finally fell silent, I told her what it felt like from my side. How it felt to be reduced to a punchline by the person whose approval I had craved. How it felt to pack a bag and leave because staying seemed more dangerous than starting over with nothing. For the first time, she did not argue. She just cried. The power balance had shifted. For years, she held the microphone. In that moment, I did. Walking away from that park, I realized I was no longer the helpless girl from the party. I was the narrator of my own story, and for the first time, I was being asked whether I wanted to write a chapter that included her in it again. What I could not see yet was that saying yes to even the smallest contact with her would pull me straight into the middle of a storm that had been brewing out of sight for years, and that my revenge would not look like what I had imagined when I first walked out with a backpack and $40. After the meeting in the park, I did not rush back into my mother's life. I agreed to small, controlled steps, like testing the temperature of water before you get in. A message here, a short call there. Coffee in a crowded cafe where we sat across from each other like two people who had just met. I kept my boundaries sharp. No visits to the house. No pretending the past could be erased. No letting her rewrite what had happened to make herself feel better. She seemed smaller now, like someone who had been living under a constant weight. She talked more about her own childhood, about how she had been raised to believe that being harsh was the same as preparing your children for the world. It did not excuse anything, but it painted a picture of a woman repeating patterns she had never questioned. I listened, but I did not let her off the hook. Months passed like that, every interaction tight and awkward. My dad stayed mostly a voice in the background, a name in passing. According to my brother, he was working long hours and sleeping in the guest room more often than not. "They are trying," my brother said once, stirring his coffee, "but it is like they are living in the ruins of that night." I could not bring myself to feel sorry for them. Not yet. One rainy afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was cleaning brushes at my small desk in the corner of the living room. It was my brother. Not a text. A call. For a second I considered letting it ring out, but something in my chest told me to answer. His voice on the other end was ragged, frayed with panic I had never heard from him before. "Liv, are you home?" he asked. "Yeah. What is going on?" There was a pause, then a breath that sounded like it had to fight its way out. "It is Dad. He collapsed at work. They think it is his heart. We are at the hospital." I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. The room blurred for a moment. I had imagined confrontations, apologies, cold shoulders. I had not prepared myself for a hospital hallway, for monitors and beeping machines, and the possibility that one of the only people who had ever tried to protect me in his own quiet, ineffective way might just be gone. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, and the question came out sharper than I intended. He did not flinch. "Because he woke up long enough to ask for you," he said, "and because you deserve the choice to come or not. I am not making it for you." I looked around our tiny apartment like it could somehow give me an answer. My sketchbook lay open on the desk, half-finished faces staring up at me. The life I had built pulsed around me in the chipped mugs on the sink, the second-hand sofa, the jacket Sarah had left on the back of a chair. I thought about my mom, about her laughter at that party, about her voice breaking in the park, about the way she had looked over my shoulder every time we met after that, like she was afraid time would run out before she finished saying everything she needed to say. "Is she there?" I asked quietly. "Yeah," he said. "She has not stopped pacing. She keeps saying this is her fault, that if she had handled things differently, maybe he would not be under this much stress." For a moment, the image of her walking back and forth in a sterile hallway made my stomach twist. There was a time when that thought would have satisfied me. The idea of her finally feeling some slice of the pain she had handed to me so casually. Now it felt more complicated. My revenge had always been simple in my head. Leave, succeed, live well without them. But standing there with my phone pressed to my ear, I realized revenge and closure are not always the same thing. I took a breath that felt like it scraped my lungs on the way in. "Text me the name of the hospital," I said. "I am coming. But I am coming for him, not for her." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Sarah walked in just as I was grabbing my keys. One look at my face and she knew something was wrong. I told her in a few clipped sentences, and she did not ask whether I was sure. She just grabbed her own jacket and said, "I am coming with you." The drive to the hospital felt longer than any bus trip I had ever taken. Every red light, every slow car in front of us felt like an insult. When we finally walked through the sliding doors, the harsh white light and antiseptic smell wrapped around me like a warning. My brother was waiting near the reception desk, eyes red, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. When he saw me, relief washed over his face so clearly it almost hurt to look at. "He is in a room upstairs," he said. "Stable for now. They are running tests. I nodded, barely hearing the rest. Then he added, softer, Mom is outside his room. She does not know you are here yet. New. My feet felt heavy as we walked toward the elevator, every step echoing with memories I had spent years trying to quiet. The night she called me a mistake, the scrape of my backpack as I dragged it down the stairs, the sound of the front door closing behind me, and now the click of my shoes on hospital tiles as I approached the woman who had rewritten my identity with one cruel joke, and who now might be about to lose everything she had taken for granted. My hand hovered over the handle of the door to my dad's room. I could hear muffled voices inside, the soft beeping of machines. On the other side of that door was the man who had asked for me, the mother who had finally started to understand the cost of her words, and a choice I could no longer postpone. The girl who left with $40 never imagined she would one day stand there with the power to decide how this family's story would move forward, or whether it deserved to. When I finally pushed the door open, the first thing I noticed was how small my dad looked in that hospital bed. He had always been this quiet, solid presence, the kind of man who could move a couch by himself and never complain. Now there were wires taped to his chest, an IV in his arm, and a monitor keeping rhythm for a heart that had decided it had had enough. He turned his head when he heard the door. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face like he thought he was dreaming. Then his eyes focused, and the way he said my name made my throat close. Olivia. I moved closer, feeling like I was walking through water. Sarah stopped by the door, giving us space without stepping too far away. My brother slid to the side of the bed, watching us both like he was afraid one of us would bolt. I stood at the foot of the bed, fingers wrapped around the cold metal rail. You look good, Dad said, voice rough. Older, in a good way. Heart attacks will age you too, I replied automatically, then winced at how sharp it sounded. But he smiled anyway, the corner of his mouth lifting like he was relieved I still had some bite in me. I deserve that, he said, probably worse. For a second, silence sat between us, thick and awkward. There were too many things to say and no script for any of them. He blew out a slow breath. I have replayed that night more times than I can count, he said finally. Your birthday, your mom's joke. The word tasted sour just hearing it. I should have stopped it, he continued. I should have taken the glass out of her hand, told everyone to go home, told you that none of what she said was true. Instead, I looked away like a coward. His eyes filled and he blinked hard. You walked out that door and I let you. I didn't chase you. I thought you needed space, and I told myself you'd come back when you cooled off. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid to confront her. Afraid to admit how badly we had failed you. The anger I had been nursing for years stirred, wanting to surge to the surface, but seeing him lying there, pale and hooked up to machines, it mixed with something else. Grief for a version of my dad who might have been different if he had not spent so long keeping the peace by sacrificing me. I was not a disagreement, I said quietly. I was not a teenager overreacting. She turned me into a punchline in front of everyone we knew. I know, he whispered, and I let it stand. I will never forgive myself for that. I do not expect you to forgive me either. But I want you to know I see it now. All of it. For the first time, I believed him. Not because he was in a hospital bed, but because he said it plainly, without dressing it up or asking me to make him feel better. Behind me, I heard the rustle of fabric and soft footsteps. My mother had been standing just outside the room, half hidden behind the partially open door. Now she stepped inside like someone approaching a cliff edge. Olivia, she said, her voice breaking on my name. I did not look at her right away. I kept my eyes on my dad, on the man who had finally said the words I had needed to hear for 6 long years. Did you know I used to draw you? I asked him suddenly. When I was little, I sketched you at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, drinking coffee. You always looked calm. I thought if I could draw you exactly right, maybe I would feel that way too. His eyes shone. I wish I had asked to see those drawings, he said. I wish I had paid more attention to the girl in the room instead of the woman performing in the living room. Mom flinched like he had slapped her. I am trying, she said, stepping closer. I have been trying, Olivia. You have to know that. I turned then, finally facing her. Up close, the changes were even more obvious, the deep lines around her mouth, the way her hands trembled as she reached for the foot of the bed and gripped it like it was the only thing holding her upright. I know you are trying, I said. I heard your apology in the park. I heard you admit what you did. But you need to understand something. I built a whole life out of the rubble you left. You do not just get to show up in that life and act like you are the one who gets to decide how the story ends. Tears spilled over. She did not wipe them away. You are right, she whispered. I don't get to decide. Not anymore. That is why I am here. Not just for him. For you. The monitor beeped steadily in the background, underscoring every word. I spent years caring more about how people saw me than how you felt, she said. I used you as material. I thought if I could make people laugh, it meant I was doing something right. I told myself you were too sensitive, that you would toughen up. And when you left, I blamed you for being ungrateful instead of looking at what I had done. She swallowed hard. Then the invitations stopped coming, she said. People whispered. Some of them told me to my face that I had crossed a line. Your father moved into the guest room. Your brother barely spoke to me. That party, that stupid joke, it did not just break you. It broke this family. And I did that. There it was. The cost. The thing I had always wanted her to say out loud. For the past year, my dad added softly, we have been in therapy because I said I would not watch her keep pretending nothing happened. I told her if she wanted this marriage to survive, she had to face what she did to you. I looked between them, my gaze darting from the man in the bed to the woman standing beside him. For so long, my revenge fantasy was simple. Be happy without them. Let them wonder. Let them feel my absence like a missing limb. But life is messier than fantasies. Here they were, broken in ways I had not imagined, asking me to decide what happened next. I am not interested in being your redemption story, I said finally, turning back to my mom. I am not your project. I am not your chance to feel like a good mother again. If I let you back into my life, it will be on my terms. That means you do not make jokes about me. You do not minimize what you did. You do not ask me to move past it faster so you can feel better. She nodded so fast her hair fell forward into her face. I will do whatever you need, she whispered. I will crawl. I will beg. I just need you to know that you were never my mistake. I was the mistake. My eyes burned, but I blinked the tears away. I had cried enough over this woman. A doctor stepped in then, checking the monitor and flipping through Dad's chart. He glanced at us over his glasses. Stress is not your friend right now, he said to my father. You need to avoid heavy arguments, big emotional confrontations. Your heart has been under too much pressure for too long. His words hung in the air, heavier than the IV bags. For once, my mom did not argue. She backed away from the bed, pressing herself against the wall like she was trying to take up less space. I will go sit in the waiting room, she murmured. Let you two talk. When she left, the room felt bigger somehow. Dad closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. I changed my will, he said quietly, looking straight at me. After you left. I left the house to both you and your brother. Your mother did not like it, but I insisted. I wanted you to know, if you ever came back, that you still had a place in this family. A tangible one. Not just words. The idea of the house, of the scene of the crime, the place where my life had split open, being mine in any way made my stomach twist. I had spent years pretending it did not exist. Now it was being handed back to me as some kind of peace offering. "I do not want a house full of ghosts," I said. "Not unless I get to decide what stays inside and what goes." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that is what needs to happen," he said. "Maybe it is time for the person who was treated like a mistake to decide what this family keeps and what it loses." Something shifted in that moment. Subtle, but irreversible. For years they had held the power over the narrative, over the house, over my place in it. Now, lying in that hospital bed, my father had just handed me a lever I had never expected to hold. Later, after the nurses had shooed us out to run more tests, I found my mother sitting alone on a plastic chair in the hallway, staring at the floor. The once immaculate woman who lived for hosting and impressing people now looked like someone who had been stripped of every layer of polish. She looked up when I stopped in front of her. "You wanted the spotlight so badly," I said quietly. "You wanted people to look at you, to laugh at your stories, to admire your life." She nodded, eyes wide. "You are going to get the spotlight," I continued. "But this time, you are not the one holding the microphone. I am." Her face went pale. "Olivia, what does that mean?" I thought of my sketches, my canvases, the little art nights where strangers had connected with pieces I had made out of pain I never explained. I thought of a title that had been circling in my head for months, but I had never had the courage to use. "It means," I said slowly, "I am done hiding what happened to me. I am going to tell the story the way it really happened, and you do not get to control who hears it anymore." For the first time since I had seen her at the coffee shop, fear flickered across her face in a way that had nothing to do with hospitals or heart monitors. This was a different fear. The fear of a woman who had spent her whole life managing her image, realizing the truth was about to walk onto a stage she did not own. I turned away before she could respond, feeling something in my chest uncoil. I did not know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. My revenge was not going to be about screaming at her in a kitchen or slamming a door. It was going to be about letting her feel, in front of others, what it was like to be reduced to a story she could not control. The girl who left with $40 had finally grown into a woman who understood that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply telling the truth loud enough that everyone hears it, including the person who tried to bury it. 2 months after my dad's heart attack, he moved into a small apartment 15 minutes from my place. The doctors said he needed less stress and more stability. The house he had shared with my mother had become the opposite of that. They were not officially divorced, but separated was the word the therapist used. My mother stayed in the big house with its perfect lawn and empty guest room. He took a one-bedroom on the edge of the city, closer to me than he had ever been in my adult life. We settled into a strange rhythm. I visited him after shifts, bringing takeout and sketching at the kitchen table while he messed with his pill organizer and complained about hospital food. Sometimes he asked about my art, and I showed him photos on my phone. He scrolled slowly, studying each piece like it was something sacred. "You have been doing this all these years," he murmured, "and I never really saw it." That sentence stuck with me. One evening, Sarah came home waving a folded flyer she had pulled off a bulletin board near the gallery, where we sometimes went to look at other people's work and dare to imagine being on the wall someday. "They are doing an exhibition," she said, dropping the flyer on the table. "Emerging local artists. They want collections built around personal stories." My heart thudded against my ribs. On the flyer, in black letters, was a line that felt like it had been written for me. "Turn your story into art." I knew instantly what I wanted to call it. The title landed in my brain with the same weight as my mother's words had that night at the party. The remaining 1%. For days, I wrestled with the idea. It would mean putting everything out there. The party, the joke, the humiliation, the leaving, the aftermath. My mother, my father, me. It would mean letting strangers see the ugliest parts of my life, and worse, letting people from home potentially see them too. My brother, my mother, anyone still paying attention. But every time I thought about backing out, I heard her voice again, echoing off champagne glasses and polished surfaces. She is this family's mistake. I remembered the laughter, the way no one stepped in, the way I left with $40 and a backpack while everyone else went to bed like nothing catastrophic had happened. So I said yes. Over the next few weeks, I worked like a woman possessed. I poured 6 years of anger, grief, and survival into canvas after canvas. One painting showed a girl at a party, her face blurred, while everyone around her laughed with mouths that were just a little too wide. Another was a close-up of a paper crown, torn down the middle. One canvas just had words layered over and over until they were almost unreadable. Mistake, accident, unwanted, extra, wrong. In the corner of that one, in small letters, I painted a final word. Survivor. The centerpiece was the hardest. It was a large piece built from ripped-up copies of my old school photos, layered with acrylic and ink. Across the top, in sharp black letters, I painted the sentence she had thrown like a grenade into my life. We used protection 99% of the time. She is the remaining 1%. Seeing it there, huge and undeniable, made my stomach flip. But it also did something else. It took some of the weight out of my chest and pinned it to the canvas instead. When the gallery accepted my submission and gave me a date for the opening, my hands shook as I held the email. Then I sent 2 messages, one to my dad, one to my brother. It took me longer to send the third. In the end, my message to my mother was simple. I am showing my work at an exhibition next month. It is about what happened. You can come if you want. But you do not get to tell me how to tell it. She did not reply right away. I did not chase her. The night of the opening, the gallery was bright and crowded. People milled around with plastic cups of wine, murmuring to each other in low, thoughtful voices. My pieces hung on one long wall, grouped together, my name printed neatly on a small white card. Olivia Hayes, the remaining 1%. Sarah squeezed my hand until my fingers went numb. Look, she whispered. My dad stood near the entrance, leaning lightly on a cane, my brother at his side. They both wore expressions that could only be described as stunned pride, like they were seeing me clearly for the first time. And then she walked in, my mother. She was dressed more simply than I had ever seen her, in a dark dress without any flashy jewelry. No dramatic lipstick. No loud laugh announcing her arrival. She looked around the room like she was afraid the walls would close in. Her eyes landed on my section of the gallery, on the big piece at the center. And for a moment she did not seem to recognize it. She stepped closer, reading the words, taking in the torn photographs, the painted sentence slicing across the top. I watched her lips silently form the words she had said out loud years ago. We used protection 99% of the time. She is the remaining 1%. The color drained from her face. She stumbled back a step, one hand flying to her mouth. A couple standing nearby turned to look at her, then followed her gaze back to the painting. I saw the realization dawn in their eyes as they put the pieces together. The words, the title of the collection, the artist's name, the older woman shaking in front of it. I walked over slowly, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Tonight, for the first time in my life, the room full of people was here for my story, not hers. She looked at me like she was drowning. Olivia, she whispered, you put that here for everyone to see. I did, I said. They deserve to know the story behind the art. So do you. People around us had gone quiet. The low buzz of conversation had thinned, leaving a ring of watchers pretending not to stare and failing. My mother's eyes filled with tears, overflowed and kept going. Her shoulders started to shake. I am so sorry, she said, voice cracking. I am so sorry. I was trying to be funny, trying to impress people who do not even matter, and I used you. I degraded my own child. I cannot take it back. I have lived with that every day since you left. She was talking louder now, the words spilling out uncontained. This was not the poised hostess at a party. This was a woman whose carefully curated image was cracking open under too much weight. You left with $40 and a backpack, she continued, tears streaking her face. And I let you. I told myself you would come crawling back. You never did. Instead, you built this. She gestured around at the paintings, the crowd, the gallery. You built a life that did not include me, and I earned that. Her knees buckled, and before I could even process what was happening, she sank to the floor in front of me. Right there, in the middle of the gallery, under bright lights and curious eyes, my mother fell to her knees and grabbed my hands. I am begging you, she said, voice raw. I am begging you to believe that you were never a mistake. I was wrong. I was cruel. I was selfish. I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But please, please do not let my worst moment be the only thing that defines us. I am on my knees in front of you because that is how low I am willing to go to show you I am not that woman anymore. The room held its breath. All at once, I was back at that party. Except now, the roles were reversed. Back then, she stood tall, confident, drink in hand, while I stood exposed and humiliated. Now I was the one standing, and she was the one on the floor, stripped of every layer of control she had ever had. This was it. This was the moment I had imagined in 100 different ways over the years, though never quite like this. Not in a gallery. Not surrounded by my art. Not with strangers looking on, some of them wiping their eyes, others glaring at her like she was the villain in a story they had just been dropped into. I felt Sarah move closer behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my dad gripping his cane with white-knuckled hands, my brother frozen beside him. For a long second, I just looked down at my mother. I did not put this on the wall to get revenge, I said slowly, my voice carrying across the quiet room. I put it there so that little girl at the party, the one with the paper crown and the forced smile, would finally be heard. I squeezed her fingers, just once, then gently pulled my hands free. You want to know what the difference is between us? I asked, my gaze locked on hers. You used my life as a joke without my consent. I used my life as art with full awareness of what it would cost me. Tears kept rolling down her face. She nodded, even though every word had to hurt. You are ashamed right now, I continued. People are watching you. They know what you did. That is not something I engineered to hurt you. That is just what happens when the truth finally gets loud enough. I crouched down so we were at eye level. I do not know yet if I can forgive you, I said quietly, so only she and the few people closest to us could hear. I do not know if I want a mother in my life who once turned me into a punchline. What I do know is that I am not your mistake. I never was. And whether or not you get up off this floor and face what you did with any kind of dignity, that is on you, not me. She let out a sound that was half sob, half broken laugh. You sound stronger than I have ever been, she whispered. And you learn that strength without me. Maybe in spite of me. I stood back up, my voice steady again. I am going to step outside for some air, I said, addressing no one and everyone at the same time. The art speaks for itself. Sarah slipped her arm through mine as I turned away. My dad reached out and squeezed my shoulder as I passed, pride and sorrow mixed in his eyes. Behind me, I heard my mother's sobs soften into quiet, shaky breaths. Someone offered her a hand. Whether she took it or stayed on her knees, I did not turn around to see. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed face. The sounds of the city felt almost gentle after the hush of the gallery. I leaned against the brick wall and closed my eyes, letting everything wash over me. The party, the laughter, the leaving, the bus rides, the late-night shifts, The sketches, the hospital, the gallery, my mother on her knees. For the first time since that night, the word mistake did not echo in my head like a verdict. It sounded like something I had outgrown. Sarah squeezed my hand. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it. "Not victorious," I said. "Just done hiding." And a little lighter. The door opened behind us. My brother stepped out, hands shoved in his pockets. "She is still inside," he said, talking to one of the gallery staff. "She is a mess, but she is not angry. Just exposed." I nodded slowly. "Good," I said. "For once, she is the one who has to live with what people think of her. I already did my time." We stood there together, letting the silence settle in a way that felt almost peaceful. Later that night, when I finally went home and collapsed onto the couch, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from my dad. "I am proud of you," it read, "not for what you did to her tonight, but for what you did for yourself." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, for the first time since I was 16, I saved a message from one of my parents instead of deleting it. Revenge, I realized, was not always about watching someone burn. Sometimes it was about stepping out of the fire they threw you into and letting them see you standing there, whole, in the smoke. Sometimes it was about telling the truth where they had spent years telling jokes. My mom once humiliated me in front of everyone, pointing at me and calling me this family's mistake. 6 years later, she was the one kneeling in front of me, crying, while the room finally saw her for who she really was, and saw me for who I had always been. If you were in my place, standing there with the person who broke you on their knees in front of you, would you offer your hand? Or would you walk away and let them live with the silence they created?